Ella Rubinstein was a woman wrapped in silence. At 40, her life had become a carefully measured routine. Mother of three, editor of cookbooks, married to a man she had stopped truly knowing years ago. Days rolled into each other like quiet waves against a lifeless shore, and Ella, though surrounded by family and tasks, felt invisible. Her heart had fallen asleep. It wasn't until she took on a manuscript from a mysterious author named Aziz Zahara that the first ripple disturbed the still waters of her existence. The manuscript was titled Sweet Blasphemy. From its very first page, Ella was drawn into a different world, one of dust-swirled caravans, Sufi mystics, and conversations that felt more like revelations. The tale of Rumi, the revered scholar, and Shams of Tabriz, the mad dervish who turned his world upside down, was unlike anything she had read before. Every chapter echoed in her soul like an old melody long forgotten. As Ella read on, her world began to change. The rules, 40 of them, scattered like secret petals within the story, were not just ideas. They were whispers meant for her. Rule 1. How we see God is a direct reflection of how we see ourselves. Ella paused, reading that line over and over. She couldn't remember the last time she had looked at herself, really looked. She had simply become a role. A mother, a wife, a helper. Her own desires slowly erased by time and compromise. In Sweet Blasphemy, Shams of Tabriz wandered into Kanya like a storm. He was wild, unpredictable, bold. He believed that love was the path to God, and that the rules of society often stood in the way of true spiritual freedom. Rumi, a respected scholar and teacher, lived a life of order and reverence, surrounded by students and admirers. But when Shams entered his life, Rumi saw the mirror of his soul, and that reflection shattered everything he thought he knew. Ella found herself growing obsessed, not just with the story, but with its author. Aziz Zahara was a mystery, a wandering Sufi, writing from hotel rooms and train stations around the world. She wrote to him, first as an editor with questions, but soon as a seeker, someone hungry for answers that her real life refused to give. To her surprise, Aziz responded not with answers, but with more questions. Deep ones, soulful ones. He told her about love, the kind that burns and transforms. Shams told Rumi, "You can study God through everything and everyone in the universe, because God is not confined in a mosque, synagogue, or church. But if you are still in need of knowing where exactly his abode is, there's only one place to look for him, in the heart of a true lover." That sentence clung to Ella. Could such love really exist? Not the fragile, negotiated love of marriage, but a consuming, all-encompassing love that moved the soul. In the 13th century, Shams and Rumi's friendship scandalized their community. Their closeness, so spiritual, so passionate, was misunderstood. People whispered, grew jealous, and ultimately plotted. But Rumi, drawn like a moth to a flame, followed Shams into an inner world where ego dissolved and only love remained. Together they danced, not just in the whirling dervish sense, but in spirit, circling the truth of divine union. Back in her kitchen, as she stirred soup or folded laundry, Ella's mind was elsewhere. She imagined the dusty streets of Konya, the sound of the ney flute echoing through the madrasa, Shams standing at the gates of Rumi's mansion, asking not to be let in, but to be met soul to soul. She thought of Aziz, out there somewhere under a foreign sky, perhaps writing back to her at that very moment. She began to write longer emails, sharing parts of herself she had buried. She confessed her dissatisfaction, her longing, her fear of growing old in a life that didn't feel truly lived. Aziz's replies were gentle and profound. "Don't search for love," he wrote. "Let love find you. And when it does, be ready to surrender." Ella felt seen for the first time in years, not just understood, but accepted without condition. Meanwhile, in the manuscript, Shams continued teaching Rumi the 40 rules of love, each rule a doorway, each one dismantling the structures of the ego. Intellect ties people in knots and risks nothing. But love dissolves all tangles and risks everything. With each lesson, Rumi shed more of his former self. He gave up his positions of power, his scholarly robes, even some of his students, who could not understand his transformation. Ella began to feel changes within herself. She stopped pretending. She started questioning. She even confronted her husband, asking him if he was happy, if he even saw her anymore. He responded with defensiveness, confusion, silence. But it didn't matter. For the first time, Ella realized she wasn't living for others anymore. She was on a journey, and the destination wasn't a place. It was a state of being. She thought of Rule 26. The universe is one being. Everything and everyone is interconnected through an invisible web of stories. Whether we are aware of it or not, we are all in a silent conversation. Ella believed that now. Aziz, Rumi, Shams, they weren't just names in a book. They were voices in that silent conversation, and she had finally begun to speak. In the ancient city of Konya, Rumi walked through the corridors of his home with a heart no longer belonging to the world he had known. Shams had become more than a guest, more than a teacher. He was a mirror, reflecting every shadow and light in Rumi's soul. Day and night they conversed about God, love, surrender, and the illusions of power. And each time they spoke, a layer of Rumi's identity peeled away. Shams once told him, "Don't try to resist the changes that come your way. Instead, let life live through you." It was not an easy teaching to accept. Rumi had built a reputation, a name revered among scholars. But Shams didn't care for reputation. He only sought authenticity. He wanted Rumi to die, not a physical death, but the death of ego, of pride, of control. Their closeness grew suspicion. Rumi's disciples grew restless. How could a wandering dervish take precedence over their years of loyalty? Whispers grew into slander. Accusations spread like wildfire. Some said Shams practiced heresy. Others hinted at darker sins. But none could understand the transformation that was taking place within Rumi. He was no longer interested in outward rituals. He sought the beloved within. Meanwhile, Ella's life in Massachusetts was undergoing its own quiet revolution. Each day she corresponded with Aziz. Her thoughts sharpened, her questions deepened. Her children noticed her silences, her husband noticed her distance. She smiled more, but also cried more, moved by the emotions she had long held back. One night, unable to sleep, she stepped out into the backyard. The stars above were brilliant, indifferent to the worries of the world. She remembered Rule 11. The midwife knows that when there is no pain, the way for the baby cannot be opened, and the mother cannot give birth. Likewise, for a new self to be born, hardship is necessary. She whispered it to the sky and felt it resonate in her bones. The pain she now felt was not destruction, it was creation. In Konya, Shams too was feeling the burden of change. He had come to awaken one soul, and in doing so, disturb the balance of many others. Rumi's wife was torn between admiration and jealousy. His sons, especially Aladdin, grew hostile, feeling they had lost their father to an outsider. The town's leaders, religious clerics, and even Sufi elders began to speak openly of removing Shams. But Shams remained unfazed. "A life without love," he told Rumi, "is of no account. Don't ask yourself what kind of love you should seek, spiritual or material, divine or mundane. Love has no labels, it is what it is, pure and free." To him, God was not in rigid laws or dogmas. God was in the beat of the heart, the warmth of a smile, the ache of longing. Love was the only path. Back in her home, Ella received an unexpected message from Aziz. He was going to be in Boston. For a moment, her heart raced, then froze. Was this a line she should not cross? Or was this the moment all the rules had prepared her for? She remembered Rule 34. Submission does not mean being weak. It means to submit to the divine flow of life. She decided to meet him. The meeting was not what she had imagined. Aziz was not glamorous or mysterious. He was simple, kind, and intensely present. They walked along the river and spoke of faith, fear, and forgiveness. He told her how he had once loved and lost, how he had found healing not in revenge, but in surrender. Love is not a destination, he said. It's the journey itself. In his presence, Ella felt no pressure, no expectations. She felt known. They didn't speak of the future. They only spoke of now. That night, Ella returned home changed. She knew she could not continue living the way she had. The life she had built no longer fit the woman she was becoming. Like Rumi, she had been struck by love, not just romantic love, but the divine kind, the kind that reshapes the soul. In Konya, the inevitable occurred. One night, Shams vanished. Rumors swirled. Some said he had left in the middle of the night. Others claimed he had been murdered by those who could not tolerate his presence. Rumi was devastated. For days he did not speak. He wandered through the streets, calling for Shams. He listened for his footsteps, stared at his shadow in dreams, but Shams did not return. Yet from the ashes of grief, something began to bloom. Rumi wrote. He wrote verses that flowed like rivers. He began to whirl, his dance a prayer, his poetry a love letter to the absence that became presence. Come, come, whoever you are, he wrote. Wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving, it doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Shams was gone, but he had not left. He had become Rumi's soul. His disappearance had completed the transformation. Rumi had become a poet of love, a mystic of longing. His fame would reach across centuries, but he no longer cared for fame. He only cared for love. Ella finished the manuscript with tears in her eyes. She closed her laptop and looked at her own life. She realized she, too, had to disappear from what she used to be. The old Ella, the one who lived for appearances, who settled for silence, was gone. She had not been destroyed. She had been reborn. Ella sat by the window as the wind brushed softly against the glass. Her husband had left early for work, the children were still asleep, and the quiet felt sacred. She no longer feared the stillness. It had become her sanctuary. Aziz's words remained in her mind like scripture etched on stone. Loneliness and solitude are two different things. When you are lonely, it is easy to delude yourself into believing that everything is okay. But in solitude, there is clarity. You face yourself. She had made a decision, one that would change everything. She had asked for a separation, not in anger or blame, but in truth. Her husband was stunned at first, then resentful. But Ella did not waver. She had lived too long for others, for the sake of harmony, pretending peace when there was only numbness. The truth had set her free, even if it was painful. She moved into a small apartment. Simple, quiet, hers. Every morning she lit a candle and read a passage from Rumi. Every night she wrote in her journal. She wrote not for publication or praise, but to understand. Rule 30. A Sufi does not judge others. A Sufi does not look down on anyone. A Sufi does not boast about his good deeds. These were the ideals that now shaped her life. Aziz continued to write to her. He was in Morocco now, then Spain, then Turkey. They did not label their connection. There were no promises, only presence. Ella found that she didn't need more than that. She felt whole even in his absence, because the love he had awakened in her wasn't really about him. It was about her connection to something higher, to God, to love, to truth. In Konya, Rumi's transformation was complete. His poetry spread like wildfire. Men and women from distant lands came to hear him speak. But he no longer saw himself as a teacher. I am nothing but a flute, he said, and it is the divine who breathes through me. The absence of Shams had become a sacred presence. He no longer sought the dervish in the streets. He found him in his own heart. He wrote endlessly, and in every verse, Shams was there. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Don't grieve. Anything you lose comes round in another form. The pain of separation had not destroyed him. It had elevated him. The people of Konya began to understand. The same man they once feared had opened their hearts. But not all were convinced. Rumi's own son, Aladdin, struggled with his father's new self. He had lost the man he once called father, the strict, disciplined scholar. This new Rumi was always dancing, writing, praising love instead of law. But slowly, even Aladdin softened. He saw the peace in his father's eyes, the joy in his words, and he too began to listen. Ella often wondered about Rumi and Shams. Had they known the impact their love would have? Had they imagined their words would travel across time, changing lives centuries later? She doubted it. That was the nature of real love. It wasn't meant for fame. It was meant to expand the heart. Then one day, Aziz wrote her something different. Not poetry, not a rule, a confession. He was dying. She read the words again and again, unable to believe. He had been sick for a long time, quietly, with grace. He had known his time was limited when he first wrote to her. That was why he had never made promises, why he never asked for more than the present. This life is short, he wrote, but love is eternal. And what we've shared, this awakening, is beyond time. Ella's world stilled. For the first time, the fear returned. Not fear of being alone, but fear of losing what had saved her. And yet, deep inside, a voice whispered one of the rules. Death is not the opposite of life, but a part of it. Well, she had read that rule before, now she lived it. She flew to Istanbul, she didn't tell anyone. She only wanted to be near him, to see him once more. Aziz welcomed her with the same warmth he always had, not as a dying man, but as a soul at peace. They sat by the Bosphorus, watched the sunset, and spoke of nothing. It was perfect. When he passed a week later, she did not scream or weep uncontrollably. She held his hand, kissed his forehead, and let him go. Back home, the seasons changed. Her children visited, her ex-husband called occasionally. She worked less, wrote more. Her life was not louder, but deeper. She began volunteering, helping women find their voices again. She spoke not about grief, but about awakening. Sometimes, she said in a support group, the greatest love story isn't the one you live with another person. It's the one you begin to live with your own soul. She remembered Rule 40, a life without love is of no account. Don't ask yourself what kind of love you should seek, spiritual or material, divine or mundane, Eastern or Western. Divisions only lead to more divisions. Love has no labels, no definitions. It is what it is, pure and free. And that was exactly how she lived. Months passed like the pages of a worn-out book, some full of color, others filled with silence. But Ella was no longer afraid of silence. She had come to know it as a form of prayer, a presence, not an absence. Each day began not with demands, but with gratitude. She no longer asked, what must I do today? Instead, she wondered, who am I becoming today? She kept Aziz's last letter in a wooden box beside her bed. There was no poetry in it, no grand parting message, just simplicity, humility, and trust in the flow of the universe. He had written, I am not leaving you, Ella. I am returning to the source. And everything I ever was, everything you loved in me, was never mine. It was God flowing through, and God remains. She would read those words whenever doubt crept in. In the years that followed, Ella's transformation deepened. She published a collection of essays, not under her name but anonymously. The book was titled The Mirror of Love. Ella, it was passed from hand to hand, found in libraries, book clubs, and quiet corners of bookshops. Some readers recognized themselves in her words. Others felt challenged, but the truth rang clear through every page. One day, as she was walking through a park, she came across a group of people whirling in a circle. Not professionally, not ceremoniously, but sincerely. Their arms were raised, their eyes closed. She stopped, stunned. One of them noticed her watching and invited her to join. She hesitated at first, then stepped into the circle. As she turned, slowly, the world around her began to fade. There was no ground beneath her feet, no sound but her heartbeat. She remembered Shams's words, don't get lost in your pain. Know that one day your pain will become your cure. She had lived those words. Every wound had become a door, every tear a cleansing rain. As she turned, she felt Aziz beside her, not in body but in essence. And she knew he had never left. In Konya, centuries earlier, Rumi had also spun, not to entertain, not to impress, but to align his soul with the divine rhythm of the universe. The whirling was a surrender. It was an affirmation of life's constant motion, the circular path of loss and love, death and return. He became the poet of the heart, his verses translated into dozens of languages. But even as his name spread across the world, he remained a servant of love. Ella traveled to Konya at last. She stood before Rumi's tomb, a simple structure surrounded by gardens and silence. She felt no need to take photos or make notes. She simply sat and breathed. She remembered Rule 12. There is a force within us that can transform our lives once we learn to listen to it. And she listened. She wandered the streets, smelled the spices, heard the call to prayer. She could almost hear the footsteps of Shams in the distance. She whispered one line under her breath, a line that had once shaken her soul and now comforted it. This moment is all there is. She returned to the States with nothing but a notebook and a full heart. She no longer needed answers, only presence. People often asked her what had caused the change in her. Some suspected a man, others a spiritual crisis. She only smiled and said, "Love." A different kind of love. A fierce, raw, sacred kind of love that strips you bare and rebuilds you not in your image, but in God's. She began holding gatherings, not lectures or seminars, but circles. Women, men, seekers, doubters, all were welcome. They read from Rumi, from Shams, from the Quran, the Torah, the Bhagavad Gita. She didn't preach, she listened. And from time to time, she would offer a rule, not as a commandment, but as a reflection. Try not to resist the changes that come your way. Don't judge where someone is on their path. Every true love and friendship is a story of unexpected transformation. Where there is love, there is God. And always, always, don't seek love. Let love find you. But when it does, be ready to surrender. She didn't forget Aziz, or the feeling of his emails, his presence, his stillness. But she no longer clung to him as a person. She had grown to love the source he had always pointed her toward. It wasn't about being with him. It was about being with the truth he embodied. Years passed. Wrinkles kissed her face. Her children grew, moved, returned, loved. Life flowed like a river, sometimes rushing, sometimes still. But no matter what the current brought, Ella floated, anchored in trust. She received a letter one day from a woman in Spain who had read The Mirror of Love. The woman wrote, "Your words found me when I was lost. I used to fear being alone, until I realized I was never alone at all. Thank you for reminding me." Ella wept, not because she was sad, but because the river had carried her words to another shore. And maybe, just maybe, those words would inspire that woman to light another candle, to take another breath, to begin again. Winter settled softly over the New England town where Ella now lived, snow coating the trees in quiet stillness. She sat by the fire, a cup of tea warming her hands, her journal resting on her lap. The years had mellowed her, but the flame inside had never dimmed. It burned steadily, not wildly, like an eternal candle in a sacred temple. That night, she opened a letter from an old friend who had once known her before her transformation. The friend wrote with curiosity, admiration, and a tinge of confusion. "How did you do it, Ella? How did you let go of everything?" Ella thought long before answering. She did not want to speak in cliches or empty advice. At last she wrote, "I didn't let go all at once. I let go moment by moment, fear by fear, belief by belief. And with each release, I received something greater in return. Peace, presence, God. The love I once thought I had to chase was always within." She sealed the envelope and placed it by the door. And then she did what had become her quiet ritual. She lit a single candle and recited a rule. That night she chose Rule 9. East, west, south, or north makes little difference. No matter what your destination, just be sure to make every journey a journey within. If you travel within, you'll travel the whole wide world and beyond. She closed her eyes and let the words soak into her. Life had not become easier. She still missed Aziz at times. She still had doubts, but they no longer ruled her. They were part of the dance, part of the whirling. Everything belonged. In Kenya, Rumi had died centuries before, but his voice had never silenced. His poems were recited in churches, temples, and mosques. His words were tattooed on bodies, scribbled in journals, set to music. He had become, unknowingly, the voice of something beyond religion. He was the poet of the soul. And Shams, who had disappeared without a grave, without ceremony, remained immortal. Not in the way statues or scrolls live on, but in the way fire lives in a flame passed from hand to hand. Shams was the fire that burned Rumi clean of ego. He was the uninvited guest who turned the house of certainty upside down to reveal the vastness of love. In Ella's home, a shelf held a few old books. One of them was Sweet Blasphemy, the novel that had started it all. She hadn't opened it in years, but tonight she did. Flipping through the pages, she came across underlined phrases, old notes in the margins, and one final passage Aziz had written in the book's dedication. To the seekers, the wanderers, the broken-hearted, may love find you, tear you apart, and build you anew. May you find Shams, and may you become Rumi. Ella smiled through tears. She wasn't the same woman who had once read those words with hesitation. She was now a living embodiment of them. Not perfect, not enlightened, but awake. She looked out the window at the snow falling, slow and quiet like grace. She whispered softly, "Come, come, whoever you are. Wanderer, worshipper, lover of leaving. It doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair." And in that moment, she knew. She was part of the caravan. She always had been, and she always would be. The 40 rules of love were no longer just teachings on a page. They were the thread of her existence. They had guided her through darkness, through beauty, through death and rebirth. And now, as the candle flickered in the dark, she passed them on silently, like Shams had done for Rumi, like Aziz had done for her, like love does for all of us, without a name, without a face, without end.